Hey friends, welcome back to Forever Changed. We are going to have a time with this episode today, but thank you for all of your feedback on our new style and us being at a studio. I think it's so fun to just like come in here and just have intentional time with one another and just chat. So this one's gonna get really deep really fast. So we're gonna start off lighthearted and share some exciting news from a friend of ours that is actually somebody that we met on our Patreon.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to share any names because we want to just respect her privacy if she desires that. But yeah, we have this incredible group of people on Patreon all around the world. And we've gotten to get to know them over the years. Well, the year, because it's been almost a year. I think it's actually
been over a year. Yeah.
Yeah. And so she is in another country of Australia, which I think she's in the middle of what, like the grassland or what?
She's in the very remote part of the country. So, most of the population in Australia is on the coastline. So they're in all those different cities, but she's out in the country. And she's got a pretty fascinating story of some things that have recently changed in her life. And why don't you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so she opened up with us a few months ago about having endometriosis. And if you're unfamiliar with what endometriosis is, it's a condition that a lot of women actually have that have to do with like painful periods and like growth in that like your reproductive area of like basically do a Google search and it'll give you all the information. But she was having a lot of like pain and she went and had endo surgery, which was really, really great for her. And they were able to get like a mass of it out. So that was a praise in general, like just having that happen. But she's had the desire to have kids like ever since before she ever got married, and her husband are just so sweet. They're like,
they're great people.
They live on a farm. They have farm animals.
Goats.
She's always like talking about how much she loves just like living out where they do and feeding her goats in the morning.
They have lambs. So whenever we do our Bible studies, we'll do a Bible study every other week, and we usually do them about 5:00 in the afternoon Eastern time. And so at that point in our day, she's waking up. She's, getting out of bed, getting ready for the day. And so sometimes she'll take her laptop out and we're all on Zoom. And so she'll show us her goats and her lambs. And sometimes there will legitimately be kangaroos bouncing like through the land, like the back of their house.
There was one time where we got on and she literally was like, "Do you see that out in the distance? That's a what do they call him? Like a jack?" Or she was calling it like I don't know. It had to do with its gender.
Should bring on a zoologist.
She was like so just normal about that. She just thought it was just that's a kangaroo. We were like freaking out. So anyway, she lives a very different life than a lot of us live.
Yes, to say the least.
So she had the surgery. A few months had gone by, and her husband were trying for kids, and she was, I think hopeful, excited, but also really nervous because that's like the prime time after the surgery when you have endometriosis to get pregnant. They just recommend that you like try those months afterwards because it's like the highest chance of you being able to have a baby, get pregnant. And anyway, so she recently messaged me. She messaged me privately. And she was just saying, "I have a little baby in my belly." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's so exciting." And she didn't share it with our group yet because she wanted to wait for a little bit more time to go by. But I believe now, like when we're recording this, it'll be even more time has gone by since then. But she's like 7 weeks or so. And we just wanted to celebrate with her. And I know that sometimes it can be scary in those beginning
it's the
weeks.
higher risk phase.
But just such a blessing. And I know that out there in the middle of Australia, her and her husband are going to thrive raising their youngins there. So anyway,
Yes. Also,
we're pumped.
we would love for you to come and hang out with us over on Patreon. You can get early
Yeah.
access to this podcast as well as all of our videos, amongst access to our biweekly Bible studies that we do. It's
Yeah.
really, really an incredible time. You can find that at patreon.com/Nick and Chelsea. Just spell it all out, Nick and Chelsea, patreon.com/Nick and Chelsea. And you can get in there for a couple bucks a month, and it is truly a really, really fun time. We love that community so much. We love
Right.
just talking to them and getting to know them and their stories, and it's been really incredible year.
Right. And everything that we raise through there goes right back into our podcast and our videos. So it's just great to be able to create this content for
meaningful
you guys.
content
Right.
that we really love.
So with today, I know we're going to take a little bit of a turn, but Nick and I have had a lot of conversations recently around our marriage and even how we view each other now that it's been 3 years, like in 2 weeks or a week and a half or so.
Yep.
We will have been married for 3 years and known each other for about 6 years. And so much growth has happened since then, but yet so much realization of who we are and who we're becoming has happened. And I feel like this isn't really talked a lot about, at least in the sense of like childhood upbringings and what you're bringing into marriage, but also what you may be bringing into your friendships and the way that you view the people around you.
Or what you might just like, even if you're single,
Right.
and like you said, friendships, the things that you might just be carrying with you that you don't even know that might
Right.
be to your detriment in some
So
ways.
what is this? I know we were talking kind of abstractly. Nick and I have both done counseling, like we have shared with you guys countless times in the past, and it's been so helpful. But for me, I recognized a need for individual counseling. And I started going in January, and it started out of like a desire to deassociate like myself from my work, like to find purpose and just fulfillment in Christ and who I am, and not associate who and what I do like together. Just trying to detach those two things. And it's been a process. But another thing that I've realized through going to counseling and seeing this counselor is that I have had fears from my childhood and past with other people that have been close to me that I've been projecting on my husband, like on Nick, for example. But this plays out in other relationships as well. So what does that look like? We were sitting in bed the other night, and I was crying because, when you have these conversations, it's tough to not involve your emotions, because it just, when you have this big epiphany of like, oh, wow, I've been viewing you wrongly, or I've messed up in this area and didn't know it. You just kind of, you really get in your head in the moment, and you're like, okay, wow, I don't want to be like this anymore. Like, how do I change? So we were talking, and I just realized there were some male figures in my past that had made me scared of being hurt in marriage, like just inevitably thinking in my mind, Nick's intentions are to hurt me, when that is absolutely untrue, not true at all. And hurt me as in like, one day he'd eventually cheat on me, or one day he would eventually just be tired of me and like leave the marriage. And those are straight up lies, obviously. But my mind was believing these things because of the way that I had viewed marriage growing up, the way that I had seen it gone on in my past as a kid. And these things are serious, like they're very deep. But once I had this moment where I was like, okay, why do I have these tendencies to try to guard myself and protect myself from any moment of like true vulnerability and intimacy within marriage? When we're having these conversations, or whenever there's a moment of like confession of sin in our relationship, my automatic response is like trying to control everything or trying to make sure that this, and this in my mind doesn't happen, because that's going to hurt and I need to protect myself, because inevitably it's going to be this downfall that's just going to keep happening. Like, that was my tendency, and I didn't know that was happening until some of it started coming to the surface. And Nick mentioned this scripture that we had talked about when we were kind of preparing for this conversation, because we don't script these things, but it's a scripture that David said about search me and know me, God, and see that I have
See if I have any grievous way in me and lead me in the way everlasting.
Right.
Yeah.
So, like, allowing that to be something that I live out is so much different than something that I just say, something that you just say into the air. And I think a lot of us could have like a victim mentality of, well, it's not really my fault that I viewed my husband this way, because this is how I was presented it growing up. And this is how it just kind of played out in my life. But from viewing marriage that way, it has now impacted my own marriage. And I've had to give it to God and say, Lord, I'm so sorry for viewing somebody who you've created and you've given me in this marriage to enjoy and to love and to cherish as somebody who's just out to hurt me. And it has nothing to do with him. So that's a little bit of a confession, something that I've been walking through and like that we're working on. I think it's easy to think when people get on a podcast or a YouTube video that they have their marriage all figured out, or, they make content around something, so they're automatically
experts
at whatever. But we've always just wanted to walk alongside life with you guys. And so that's one area where I've seen it. And then I realized there are insecurities that I've had with women in my life because of the way that I've seen friendship play out in my childhood. And so unpacking this, like, in a way you can call it trauma, but it's compared to other people, it's not trauma.
Well, you perceived reality in one way,
mm-hmm.
and you saw things and you were exposed to things that shape you, and it formed your mindset and your thought patterns around
mm-hmm.
friendships or around marriage or other people in certain ways because of what you had viewed. I think sort of in a similar vein, the same goes with accents of sorts. If you grow up in the South, all you're exposed to is this one sort of way of speaking. If you grow up in New York City, you're exposed to an entirely different way. If you grow up in London, you're exposed to an entirely different. So it's all the same language, but it's 3 different ways of communicating it. And the reason for that is because of what your surroundings were, of what you were seeing, what you were perceiving reality to be. So on one hand, we can definitely agree that I don't think it was your fault that you were necessarily exposed to certain things, but that doesn't make them right as they play out into life.
Right.
So if the effects of these perceptions then come out into your life in a negative way, which I think we can both agree they did and have, and we're addressing them, that doesn't mean that that's okay. The only part of the scenario that may not necessarily be your fault is the fact that you were exposed to them. But just like we still have to, they still have to be worked through and worked on, not only for your own good, but for the good of other people as well.
Exactly, because then you start to view everyone in your life through this lens that you've created, because it's just been a habit and a pattern for you to view others in a way of protection or with that wall up.
I want you to be as clear as possible with people, because I think that there's probably more people going through something very similar like this than they might even think. When you say this lens, what does that lens look like? Like,
Well, I can only share what it was for
right.
me. But with our marriage, viewing you from the lens of I love him, but I can't trust him fully because I have a preconceived thought pattern that leads me to believe that I'm going to be hurt by you
Hmm.
because of the way that I saw
Right.
cheating happen in my childhood. I saw just destructive relationships
Yeah. Destructive
and
patterns.
unfaithfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever whenever you would confess sin to me, like out of just like we have a
Yeah.
covenant and
Yep.
that is what we do.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a means of ground, like where this lie can be dug even deeper into my mind.
Yeah.
So in a way, those moments actually brought this to light, which I'm thankful for, where we confessed together.
Yeah.
But
Well,
for
and
a
that's,
long
I mean, that's so
time,
important too, because
yeah,
people just don't do that. They think that, oh, I'll just, not worry about it, or I'll just,
right,
as long as she doesn't know or he doesn't know, then it's fine. Like, man, that is not okay.
right.
Like, you need to, like, you literally have cancer, and you're just like, oh, it'll just go away, you know?
Cancer in the
Yeah, cancer in the form of a relationship. Like,
right,
there's a deep, deep issue. There's a deep problem that if it's not addressed, it'll just continue to grow, and harm your relationship, harm your dating relationship, harm your engagement, harm your marriage.
right.
And so,
So that's the lens, and
yeah.
the question I want to bring up is I wonder how many people are walking
Hmm.
in their current relationships or in their friendships with a crippled leg in a
Yeah.
sense of you can't fully be yourself or can't fully see what the potential of that relationship can be because you're viewing them in the wrong way. You're
Right.
viewing them
Yeah.
through a hurtful lens, through a lens of control or trying to see whatever it is. I mean, there could be so many. But what do we do from here? I think that's the question is like for me, it's been an unraveling of where does this start and what can I forgive and how can I keep forgiving like moving into the future. I think the key is forgiveness, forgiving yourself for maybe the patterns that you've picked up on and didn't know were your normal but actually has been hurtful to your relationships and you want to be free of that normalcy
Yeah.
because it's become so normal to you. I've heard somebody say once their flesh patterns like
Hmm.
it's not necessarily good the way that you've been functioning,
Yeah.
but it's just been normal to you. So you think that there's no other way to operate in relationships. So as far as counseling and how I'm dealing with that, I think just confessing that these are the patterns that I've noticed and having these conversations with those people that you've had these perceptions of that you didn't know were there until maybe you're listening to this podcast and you're like, wow, like, am I operating out of a healthy place in these relationships? Like, do I have some lies I need to like work through? Because a lot of us have grown up seeing not so perfect relationships and that can shape us. But I think becoming aware of those things and how to allow them to not affect you into your adult relationships and to see people for who they truly are rather than through a filtered lens is huge. So how do you think this has maybe played out in your life? Because I can't be the only one like in
No,
this
of course not.
conversation.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think that in a similar way, I grew up believing certain things.
Like what?
Well, I think it's important to first discuss. Um, I think it's important to first discuss the areas of life that you're believing certain things in, rather than just like, I grew up believing certain things. Like, oh, tell me, like, well, I believe that the sky is blue, so you could be as vague as you want with it. But
Mm.
yeah, in the form of marriage, I mean, I really had a different viewpoint growing up. I grew up in a different part of the country than you did. And I think to some degree that makes a little bit of a difference, but I think that all of humankind is still ravaged by sin and by brokenness. And so you still see the negative effects of that play out, whether it be in your church or your school or your friend groups or communities, just in any regard. But I grew up with even before I was a Christian, I grew up with a really firm understanding of what marriage entailed,
Mm.
that it was a promise, and that it was something that you don't take lightly and you don't break it, and you fight for it. You fight to keep it. You fight for its health. And through good times and bad times, through easy times and hard times, it is a commitment. And it is something that you don't walk alone, but it's something that you walk through together. And so I was really fortunate to grow up with that kind of a framework and to see that actively played out. One of the areas that I did grow up with that I think was harmful to some degree is the older I got, the more I realized that in the community and the culture that I grew up in, and I'm not just, I'm not referring to my home or my household or, my church. Like, I mean, like my state. I mean, like the next
Mm.
4 zip codes around me. It was just a really like embedded thing in the culture to not be really transparent and to not discuss openly details about life or about personal life or about struggles that you might be facing. And for me, I think that I noticed early on that it was this ploy to seek to save face. Not necessarily a ploy, but it was this method. I think that's a better word to save face, to not, allow people or show people that, hey, I might be struggling, or there might be something that's wrong or something that might be going on,
Mm.
because you wanted to appear and look presentable. You wanted to look a certain way towards your peers or towards other people.
Mhm.
And so as time went on, I think that I developed this unhealthy way of looking at life in such a way that I can't tell people that I have problems. I can't tell
Hmm.
people, or I can't go to counseling and admit that, there's things I'm working through. I can't discuss openly that I did something that, might have been embarrassing, but it's important to talk about and work through, because that just wasn't the culture that I grew up seeing. And in some ways, I can understand that, and then in some ways, it's really hard for me to understand that. But I will say that I now, at this point in life, I feel a lot healthier, mentally, emotionally,
Mm.
spiritually, even, and physically. I think to a degree, like you don't feel so much stress. And I think a big contributing factor for that is because I view this differently now.
Yeah, that's good. This podcast is in partnership with BetterHelp. Is there something preventing you from achieving your goals or seeing life the way you'd like to? Nick and I have used BetterHelp counseling in our marriage and individually over the years, and we've seen such a tremendous difference in the way we communicate, how we view parenting, and even individually feeling healthier in every area of our life. BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. You'll be matched with a therapist in under 48 hours. And you can log into your account anytime and send a message to your therapist. You'll get timely and thoughtful responses. Plus, you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions so you won't ever have to sit in an uncomfortable waiting room. BetterHelp is committed to facilitating great therapeutic matches so they can make it easy and free to change therapists if needed. We've actually done this before and it was so easy to do, and it's more affordable than traditional offline therapy, and financial aid is available. So if you guys want to get 10% off your first month at BetterHelp, you can go to betterhelp.com/Hurst. Again, that's betterhelp.com/HURST. So do you think that's played out in marriage at all, like with us? And because I did notice a tendency in you early on to kind of any sort of like moment of struggle, you did have a tendency to keep it to yourself, or I mean, I think you're still working through that today.
Yeah, I'm
In
sure I
some
am.
ways of
Yeah.
like not being super quick to
Hmm.
confess something like
Yeah, that I'm going through, or yeah,
right or
right.
sin or whatever it is.
Hmm.
Whereas I think we're both learning in this area. Like for me, I feel like I realize things as I'm talking them out. Like I'm a verbal processor.
Yeah.
I feel like you're an internal processor. So whenever you or I are struggling with something, like it looks very different outwardly.
Hmm.
So like right away when I'm struggling with something because I'm just like
Yeah.
talking it out.
See it all over you.
Um, Whereas with you, you take it alone,
Hmm.
and I don't think that's necessarily bad. And I don't think it's necessarily bad the way that I do it. But I think,
Just different methods to solve the same problem.
right.
We're both seeking to find resolution and a solution to the
Mm-hmm.
issues of life that we all inevitably face. And for you and I specifically, that just happened. Our methodology there just looks a little different.
Right.
Now,
But,
if you allow it to become unhealthy
mm-hmm.
to the point of either seclusion or you're just airing out all your dirty laundry to anybody who will listen,
Right.
then
There's the
neither
extremes.
one of those are going to get you to a good place.
Right.
So I think for the verbal side of things, it's probably important to make sure that you draw the line in the sand somewhere as to the point of
Mm-hmm.
what is to be said. And I think it's important for an inward processor like me, as I'm thinking through things and pondering on things and trying to figure out the best strategy for solution. I think it's important to eventually get to a place where you actually take action and not
Mm-hmm.
just try to bottle it up and tuck
Right.
it somewhere and like that's where it stays, but to actually work through that and talk through it. And yeah, I think that's the simplest and most concise way to communicate that point. So yeah, I think it has played out into marriage, and I think it's played out into regular life. I think it's played out into friendships, and I've seen it with you, especially recently. You've been making a lot of drastic changes because I think you've noticed, and I think you've seen the urgency behind wanting to be healthy and wanting to do it the right way and wanting to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that you're not sabotaging friendships or relationships
Right.
due to any particular reason. And I think that's a really good thing. I think it signifies growth. I think action in the right direction always signifies growth. And I've seen a lot of that in you lately. And I think that's really awesome.
And I think naturally it's rubbing off on you. I'm not
Yeah.
saying that it's all me, but I'm saying you and I have been kind of listening to this one book that I think we could mention because a lot of people love this book,
What book?
Atomic
Oh,
Habits.
yeah, by James Clear. Yeah.
Right. So there's this book called Atomic Habits that talks about basically the process is the goal, not the end destination of any
Well, no,
habit that you're
the
trying to.
identity change is the goal. A process is a method by which you get there.
Right.
Yeah.
But he emphasizes a lot on processes because like for example, I think he talks about like a 5K. If you have a run that you're getting prepared for, you're training, you're eating right, you're getting everything ready for this end destination of running this race. And then you get to the day and you run the race and it's great, but you no longer have that to drive you. Then what keeps you going? What is your process from not necessarily like having that one end goal anymore? And I think with any habit that we're trying to change or any way that we're trying to change ourselves for the better, embracing the process in daily life. He talks about like if you improve 1% a day each day, think about the trajectory that you're going on, and you might not notice much of a change in a week, but you'll notice a change within a year
Yeah.
because you're how much more percent better? Like
365.
yeah,
Yeah.
65% better. Whereas if you are getting worse, 1% worse each day, you will
Yeah.
notice a significant difference like
And then
that.
I think that more people beyond going one way or the other there, as we, strive to keep the conversation on,
Mm-hmm.
projecting things
Right.
in the form of relationships. Um, I think that a lot of people have mistaken health to be staying at that 0%. It's like I'm not getting worse, but I'm also not getting better. And so that's a good thing. And like I'm just staying level.
Right.
And some days I might go up 2 and then some days I might drop 3 or 4 and then I just get back to baseline. And I think a lot of people live there. And you won't notice the difference. You won't notice the changes. You won't notice a massive shift in any one direction for the good or for the bad if you
Yeah.
stay in that place, but over time you will. He does in the book use a analogy of a jet leaving Los Angeles and it
Hmm.
turns direction 3 degrees. And that is not much. I mean, there's 360 degrees on a compass, so a degree of a change of 3 degrees isn't much, when you leave one place. But by the time you get across the country to an end destination
You're
where
in
you
an
should have been, you're in a
entirely.
massively different place.
Yeah.
So small changes over time are what is going to make the biggest difference in your life personally.
Yeah.
So if you read a book or you get off a podcast and you just have this big overwhelming drive and motivation to go and make massive shifts in your life, that very well might help and it might do something.
Because
But
you have motivation.
what's going to be more sustainable is making small changes and implementing them for a long period of time. For example, if I go and spend $5 extra per day in the first week, I'm not really going to see a massive difference in my overall financial health. If I do that for 7 years, I'm going to see a massive, massive change in my financial
Right.
well-being. Now, if I go and save $10 a week, I'm not going to see a really big difference in my savings account after a month's time. I'm going to see a $40 account. But if I do that for 20 years, yeah, I'm going to see a pretty big change of consistent action over a long
Mm-hmm.
period of time. And so, yeah, but the big goal of the book is the identity change. It's like, what
Right.
kind of person would a marathon runner be? Would they be someone who's sitting on the couch eating Cheetos and, watching Netflix,
Right.
which I never do? Or is it going to be someone who actually is going out training on a consistent basis and trying to be? So,
Right.
so for you, I want you to think about whether it's relationally, whether it is for the gym, whether it's with your schoolwork, whether it is for your home life, whatever it is.
Relationship to food.
Yeah, what kind of person? I don't know. What kind of person would a what kind of marriage would a healthy person have? Like, what kind of marriage would someone who is serious about their life and about their marriage have? What kind of financial well-being would someone who is financially wise have? So you're trying to change an inward thing rather than just like the actions and the
Yeah.
processes that you take, because when you change something inwardly about you, what's going to happen outwardly will naturally flow from that, because um, you always take action on what you believe or what you don't believe.
Mm.
And so if your beliefs aren't
It's
changing
true.
you, then you probably don't fully believe them.
Yeah, and I would love to touch on, since this is kind of going in that direction, if you're noticing that you've projected fears on a fear or maybe an insecurity that you've had about yourself or another person, or even like male, female. Like for me, it's been males, like having an inward fear that guys just hurt women, because of the guys that I've witnessed growing up, which is not true. There's a lot of great guys in the world. Um, and, people are not perfect. Like, not expecting my husband to be perfect, or like expecting my husband to be perfect, is not going to end well, because we're both flawed. But in this area of like progressively trying to get better and maybe changing these tendencies that we've had since childhood within our relationships, what happens when there's this like tug of war in our heart to go back to
Mm-hmm.
the patterns that we've had because they're just comfortable, or in a way it feels more safe for me to put up a wall because that's what I've always done, and it's scary to let that down,
Mm-hmm.
to let somebody into a place where you've kind of always had guarded. What happens when those come up, or when we're challenged to break that
Yeah, and
off.
it's a weird dichotomy too because
Yeah.
you would believe that you're safe when the place that is most important is guarded,
Right.
but in fact, that's when you're most vulnerable. And the
Mm.
way that you're the safest and the way that you're most protected is actually when those walls and when those things come down and when
Mhm.
you're completely and fully exposed and completely vulnerable. That's when you're actually the safest, at least in the context of relationships and trusted relationships too.
Right. So with that, what I've been trying to actively do when I've noticed that my old patterns are trying to come up and bite me in the butt, or bite a relationship in the butt, I will have this internal dialogue in my head that is kind of going on. And a lot of times, this arises emotions in me, like anger or frustration or
Hmm.
um, sadness, because it's hard to work through these things. It's hard to wrestle through an old pattern that has just been normal to you. But I will say, whenever I've like submitted those thoughts to God and I'm just in my head, I'm like, Lord, I do not feel like praying right now. I do not feel like giving this to you
Yeah.
because I am a control freak in this area. For some reason, you've revealed this to me, and I want to be Lord over this area of my life more than I want you to be Lord over
Mm.
this in my life. And realizing that and having that realization and saying, I am not more safe with me than God is in that area. Like, I am not God. So I am not a great safe place with this area in my life, like with my marriage.
Yeah.
You are a part of this three-strand thing,
Well, you're the creator. Like
Yeah.
you're the one who made me. And so
Right.
how audacious to think that I am more qualified to handle this
Yeah.
than you are. It's kind of like saying, I've driven this car for 500 miles. I think I know this thing better than the engineers at the
Right.
facility that made it,
But it's so easy to get into that pattern of just not even recognizing it. So I think the first step is just recognition that this has been a pattern in your life and you want it to stop because you realize your relationships can't operate at their highest
Yeah.
potential. I know you say that. I
S-
say the word operate
Yeah.
all the time.
I need somebody to count for me
How many times
how
I
many
say that?
times in just the podcast that we've done that Chelsea has said the word operate.
So, realization, and then confession. I believe
Hmm.
confession to the person that
Powerful.
you have had this towards is huge,
Yeah.
because not only are you holding yourself accountable at that point, but they're holding you accountable to trusting them.
Well, you're also releasing yourself
Yeah,
from this. It's kind of like
because
putting the key in the lock and turning it. Like you can sit there and stare at the problem all you want to, and you can hope and wish and blow fairy dust and rub magic like crystal balls and like pray and ask God to help. And all God's gonna say is like, "Hey, I gave you the key. The locks. Like put the thing in it and turn it." And until you
we're
actually
just sitting
take,
there polishing the key,
yeah,
but not
until you take action, nothing's gonna change.
right.
I mean, nothing is going to change until you do something, put your hands on it, grab hold of it,
Hmm.
and change it.
Yeah, so I think the next movement is forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Realizing the power of forgiveness will change your life. Like, I really believe that in relationships, but even within yourself, of just releasing those things to God and just saying, God, I've thought that I'm better than you in this area, that I've got total control over my mind, over my marriage, um, and I thought I was doing great. And then all of a sudden, you revealed the sin in me, and
Mm.
this is what I want to do with it. I want to say I'm sorry, and I want you to be Lord over my life. Like, I actually say that you are in every area. And I want to take you at your word. And I just want to ask, will you forgive me? And the same goes with you. Like, asking Nick, like, will you forgive me in this area? And, moving from that, you're like forever changed, like
Yep.
truly.
Yep.
in that area.
And I think the reason that you do that is because you believe that,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And I know that sounds really shallow and really, really simple, but you would never ask God to overtake something and to lead you in some kind of way if you didn't really believe that he could do it. And so I
Yeah.
think, you know, one of the early preliminary things that you've really got to wrestle through is like, do you actually believe that God is qualified to handle your mess? Do you really believe that he's qualified to handle the situations that you find yourself in?
Right.
And you either do or you don't. There's no I'm getting there, warming up, or I kind of do, or I think he might be able to, or I'm not so sure. It's like, no, you do or you don't. It's
Right.
yes or no.
And it goes, I know that we want to wrap this up soon, but it goes hand in hand with what was said at church about there's a Man of God series that our church
Yep.
is
Man of
doing,
God.
and it talks about how, you know, there's basically two different groups of people who say Jesus is Lord over my life, and those who actually trust that Jesus is Lord over their life
And live like it
and live
because
it.
they trust.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think when we're men and women that actually take God at his word and we say, you know, as much childhood trauma that I have, as much fears that I've had in the past, as much that I've tried to control everything, you are revealing these things in me so that I know that I can give them to you. Like, he's not revealing sin in us so that we can be condemned. I think a lot of times we think that, like, because I feel this guilt or this urgency to do something about sin that's in me, that I need to hide, or I need to like what do I do about these uncomfortable
Deal with it myself.
feelings? Yeah, deal with it myself, try to control it myself, you know, go back to yourself. But in reality, he wants to bring liberation and freedom through the process. And that's what I'm noticing in these areas of my life is the more that it feels uncomfortable, the more that I know God's doing like deep work that like is meaningful. So in a way, running towards the uncomfortability and just like embracing it rather than shying away from it allows you to actually have those like 1% of growth each day.
It's because, like, what do you want more, comfort or growth?
Right.
You know, do you want to stay the same and be normal, or do you want to, you know, be the person that God's called you to be and has designed you to be? And that's not an easy process at all. And I think that the listener needs to hear that, and I think that I need to hear that often. Right. Is that, you know, God has called you to be someone, but that doesn't mean that the process is going to be just this pain-free, easy, happy-go-lucky journey. It'll be difficult and hard because a part of renewing your mind, as Romans says, is it's hard. It's difficult. It's a challenge. It's a process. And I'm very, very fortunate that we get to walk that journey together and that we get to walk the journey with so many of you. It's truly a remarkable thing.
We're grateful to have this conversation with you guys and just to be able to listen to the real stuff that you guys are going through and the stories that God's done in your life. We had a listener on our podcast last year where she shared the testimony of her dad and just how powerful. You guys can go listen back. It's about her dad having a stroke and the impact that had on their family at the time. Well, life did not get easier for her or her family. Her dad recently passed away, and we love getting to talk to her and hearing her perspective, but she's grieving, and it's hard for her. And I think people like that, like being able to do life with people who are in the middle of grief or in the middle of just a tough time, you know, like we all go through those seasons. That's why we do this, you know, like we don't want to just come on here and talk about fluff.
Yeah, or just be another podcast. That's
right. And I'm just grateful like we can come here and actually talk about that and not have to be ashamed about it. So grateful for you guys, grateful for this conversation, and join our Patreon if you guys want to be a part of a community. Seriously, I want more people at our Bible studies. That's the big thing.
Yeah.
I feel like that would be really fun to just have so many perspectives around the world.
If you love God and you love his word, hit up the Patreon, join the Bible study. It really is a blast. Like, we really do have a lot of fun.
We do.
And we get deep.
Yeah.
There's been tears.
I think that's why maybe we haven't seen hundreds of people, is because we're real deep.
It does get deep. It's not, if you want, hey, I'll just say, if you want like a God loves you and he has amazing things for your life, which I believe he does, but if you just want somebody to like pat you on the back and just like make it really, really easy for you, probably don't come. Because it's like, we get in the word, we talk through it, we get in the context, we talk about real life, we get in the meat of things, and down in the dirt with it, and it's transformative. It's changed me. It's changed a lot about me.
I know.
Yeah,
it's
been
changed
good.
Me too.
But love y'all. Excited to be back on here consistently. Excited to be back doing the podcast, and we will see you next week.
See you guys.